All right, let's talk about what the difference is between comparative fault and contributory negligence. Contributory negligence and comparative fault are very, very similar. They are super close cousins to each other. The main difference is in how they affect the legal outcome at the end of the case. So let me explain. Contributory negligence means that if you are partially at fault, you contributed to the accident or to the circumstances that gave rise to the accident in which you were injured, then you were contributorily negligent. You contributed to the negligent act. That doesn't mean that the defendant isn't more responsible or that they didn't also contribute to the negligent act, but you also played a part in that. Comparative fault, like I said, super close cousin to that. Comparative fault means that we assign a percentage to how much did you contribute to the negligence. Was it 1%, 10%, 50%? The reason why this matters is depending on the state that you live in. Some states adopt a comparative fault model. Some states adopt a contributory negligence model. And you might be sitting here wondering, what the heck's the difference? Let me tell you, it's all about the outcome. If you live in a contributory negligence state, if you are found to be 1% contributory, 1% responsible for the accident, you lose. You have to prove 100% responsibility on the defendant to win in those states. Now, there's ways to do that. People still have successful personal injury lawsuits in those states all the time. But comparative negligence, which is adopted by the majority of states in the United States, comparative negligence says that if the jury comes back and says that, you know what, we think the defendant is definitely at fault, they did bad acts, they're dirty, rotten scoundrels, but we do think the plaintiff is 10% at fault. They contributed to their injuries. They're at fault for 10% of this accident. What happens then is, let's say the jury awards $100,000. The judge would take that $100,000 and then the jury would say, but the defendant's only 90% responsible for it. And then the judge, after the fact, would reduce that $100,000 down to $90,000. They would reduce the jury award by the amount that the plaintiff was found to be responsible for the accident, that comparative fault. So that's the main difference between comparative fault and contributory negligence. They're very close to being the exact same thing. The big difference is on how it affects the outcome of your case on the back end. Here's an example of comparative fault from a case I just resolved last week. I had a driver, my client, approaching an intersection, the green light. My client was driving the speed limit. As she approached the intersection, the light started to turn yellow right as she approached that intersection. Now, rules of the road and our basic understanding of how to drive says that if she can't come to a reasonable or safe stop, then she needs to continue through that intersection even though the light is yellow. The defendant driver was sitting in the left-hand turn lane wanting to turn left, and as the light turned yellow, his statement was that the plaintiff started to come to a slow. So he took that as a signal that she was going to stop. And so he proceeded to turn and they collided. And so the defense argument is while they had a duty to yield and they shouldn't have gone through because they alleged that my client started to slow, then that means that she should be found 10% responsible. Now, this is an argument that the defense is entitled to make, but I can tell you right now, the judge didn't buy it for one bit. So if you look at that situation, who do you think should bear the fault? 100% on the defendant, or should my client have been found 10% at fault? What I argued is that my client, take her at her word, driving the speed limit, approaching the intersection at a green light. The light turned yellow either right as she approached it or right as she started to go through it. I argued that at that point in time, she can't reasonably come to a safe and prudent stop, and the law would allow her to continue through the intersection. And that the defendant, who stopped at the light in the middle of the intersection, waiting to turn left, had the highest degree of control to prevent this accident. That they are 100% responsible, and the judge agreed with me.